relate to you. And we don't always make it the right way because we don't understand your worldview. Now, you have ones from different parts of India. You each have an individual worldviews in that area also. So you always don't know how to relate to that particular area either, south, north, east, west, no? I mean, people from Kerala, Tamil Nadu, up north Punjab, and Sri Lanka, and all different places, and you have different ways of thinking and relating and acting. So that is called a worldview. It's how you view your own area and how you view what other people out there are, how they look at what you're doing, okay? So some of you may have grown up believing in millions of gods, right? Yes. So that was your worldview. You believed it. It was the truth. It was real to you. Some of you may have grown up thinking there was no God. And that was your worldview. And some of you may have grown up as an Adventist. That's your worldview also. So within each culture, there's also subcultures or lesser, smaller groups, right? Because if you grew up in, say, a Hindu culture, but you grew up as an Adventist, you would have Adventist culture mixed with some Hindu culture, right? So everybody has a little different way of looking at life. So when you're trying to reach someone with a certain worldview, and you're wanting to bring them the Bible worldview, they sometimes clash with each other, right? Because they're like, that's not how it is, that's not how it should be. And it's hard for people to change. Because it's there, and it's so much in their culture. If they change, their culture might turn against them, right? Also, their people in their culture. Okay? So it's been found in the worldview of the people in the West, their worldview changes through sharing information, ideas, and a list of reasons why they should change their thinking. That's how most, I'm always using most, not all, okay? Because everybody is a little different. So, but most people will change their worldview if they see that it makes sense to them in the West. But as studies have been done, most people in the East, in Asia, they will change their worldview. There's three main ways, okay? One of them is through, they have a new experience. If they have a new experience, they will be willing to change their worldview. Okay, so that it might be, they might have a dream that God will bring to them a dream. Okay, so I want to, while we're on this, I want to clarify something I said yesterday. Okay, yesterday I talked about spiritualism coming into churches, Christianity. And I told an illustration of someone having guided prayer and praying that a Jesus figure will come and show himself to you, right? So you're telling Jesus when to come. Does that mean that if Jesus comes to you and talks to you, that that's wrong? No, okay? But he's chosen when he's going to talk to you. We cannot make him come when we want him to come. So that's the difference, because sometimes people have an experience where they have a dream or a little vision, or Jesus will say, I want you as my child. That's very good. God uses that. But when we try to make it happen ourselves, that's when it's spiritualism. So that's the difference between the two. Okay? So through a dream, or a miracle, and then the other one is through a new explanation of the worldview through stories. So those are the ways people's mindset is changed to be able to accept a different worldview, like a Bible worldview. So, can we change people's thinking?
Only
Can
God.
we do it?
Only God can.
Only God can do it. We're just the tool that God can use. Okay? So we don't give dreams and we don't give miracles. God can work through us for miracles, but we can tell stories and help people to have a change in their thinking through the Holy Spirit working on them. Okay? So I want to tell you a story now. This happened to some friends of ours. We were working in Thailand, doing ministry there. And this husband and wife were worked there for many years, and so they learned the language really well. Like they could just speak it like that nicely. So they were working in Thailand. So this lady's name was May, and she had been a Buddhist for many years, and then she joined God's family and the church. All right? She was taking care of her granddaughter at the time, and the granddaughter came with her to church all the time. So the missionaries taught them, of course, many, many things. They taught them about the Sabbath, and they taught them about heaven, and about eternal life, and so many things. And they had given her many, many Bible texts to prove what they were teaching her. So she was coming to church. Well, one day her granddaughter became very sick. And so she was like, pray, pray. They all prayed together. And they earnestly asked God to heal the granddaughter. But instead of her being healed, she died. That is a big challenge when you're a new Christian for something like that to happen, because you sometimes think that God will just say yes to everything, right? And so you don't understand that God's ways are still best, even though He says no sometimes. And so May became very depressed and discouraged, and the missionaries shared Bible promises. Your daughter and you will be in heaven together, and encouraging her that she would be with her granddaughter. They prayed with her to give her hope, and still she would feel better for a while, and then she would get depressed again. And it just happened like this. So later the missionaries were studying about the Sabbath, and they decided to share the Sabbath with a group of people. This was like with May and with some others. They decided to share the Sabbath through a story instead of just through Bible texts only. And so they started sharing the story of the Sabbath. They told about the battle between God and Satan, and they told about how worshiping God on the Sabbath showed that your love and loyalty were to the Creator God and not to the Satan, the enemy. And then they told the story of creation, how God had given the Sabbath as a gift to people at the very beginning. So the Sabbath was there to show their connection with Him. And then they showed all down through the ages how Noah and Abraham, the Israelites, and how Jesus and His disciples and many others had followed God by keeping the Sabbath. So, and they even shared how God's family will worship together in the new earth together. And May listened. She'd never heard this like this before. So the next day they all went to church together, and the pastor decided, I'm going to share the same thing for church. So May heard it all over again in church, right? So she heard that story. And then she came to them in the afternoon. They had a potluck lunch together, and she said, tell me again. Tell me again. I want to hear it again. So they told her the story. How many times was this? Third time now, in one weekend. Okay? She said, tell me again. I want to hear it again. So they told her the whole story. They even added a little more. They talked to her about how the Sabbath is a sign that we trust God, and that He will fulfill His promises, and that He will make all things right. And in the new earth, you and your granddaughter will be together worshiping God in there. And she something changed in her heart. And her depression and her hopelessness was gone. And she was full of joy and hope after that. The story made it real to her. See, Bible texts are wonderful and good and important, but the story made it her own. This was the experience of people all down through the ages, and now she was in the story. It became personal to her. And so now she felt like she was part of this group of people through all the ages who kept the Sabbath, and she was going to be part of the group to go to heaven with them. It was so exciting to her, and it changed her whole view on life. Her worldview finally changed. Before, it had not changed. It was still the old way with some new truths on top of the old worldview. Okay? So it made a huge difference in her life. So let's have a little short discussion. What is the difference between the way the East and the West will have experienced a worldview change? How about the West? How do they often change their worldview? Okay, someone speak up. How does the West often change their worldview?
When they hear information.
For reasons, right? Okay. Okay, sharing information. Okay. And so then what about the East? How do they have a change of worldview? There's 3 parts.
The experiences. New explanation of reality.
Visions. Okay. Miracles.
Dreams.
And through stories. Yes. Stories change the worldview. And this is done through a lot of research. They've studied how worldview is changed. So, what part of the world was Jesus?
East.
He was in the East, so the Bible is really made for the East. But there's enough in there that will reach the West also, right? God made it for everyone, all of us. And I'm not saying that one is totally one way or one is totally the other. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying the general direction is like that. Through research has been studied, okay? So, people in the East are more relational than people in the West. And so that's something that it's interesting when you jump from one place to another and you have to adapt, right? Okay. So, how had May been taught about the heaven and Sabbath at first? What was the way they had taught her?
Kind of.
At first, what was she? How did they teach? Okay, they just told her things, and they taught her Bible texts. So what happened to change her understanding?
It's when you understand about the great controversy, something, the story.
The great controversy story. She felt like she's now part of that story, and she's in it with it. And then it felt real to her that she would see her granddaughter in heaven. Before it was words, now it's she experience. Okay? All right. So I have a question. Let's look at Mark chapter 4, 33 and 34. Mark chapter 4. Someone can read it when you find it.
And many such parables spake he the word unto them, and they were able to hear it. But without a parable spake he not unto them. And when they were alone, he expounded all things to his disciples.
Okay, so for the general, when he first met the people, what was his main way of teaching? Parables, stories. And then for deeper study, what did he do? He explained it. So maybe he gave more Bible texts and he would do more reasoning and explaining to them. So Jesus used all the ways, right? But he started with the stories, then he went deeper, okay, with people. So we're not missing anything that way. We get all of it. Okay, when people ask Jesus a question, how did he answer them usually?
He did not answer directly, sometimes parable illustrations.
Yeah, he didn't usually just say the answer straight out, did he? No, he would tell a story. He might even ask them a question back, right? And so he wanted them to thinking, what is this meaning? So that when he shared, they would be how to put it into practice in their lives. So a good example of this is the Good Samaritan story, right? Because they're asking questions. Jesus doesn't just say, well, of course your brother is everybody around you. No, he got them into the story. He got them feeling the pain of someone who's hurting, right? Compassion. He's teaching them compassion, and he's teaching them a lesson through the story. And so it's really good when you're working with people to not just give quick answers, but give them a relationship, get them in the story. It changes the heart of the person more that way. So with Paul, he went around teaching and preaching. Did he just preach to the Jewish people? Paul, the Apostle Paul. Did he just preach to Jews?
No.
No, he did preach to the many, many Jews. But who did he preach to much of the time to? The Gentiles, the heathen, the Hindus, the Buddhists, right? That's the animists. He preached to them. So some of the things we can learn, how did he do this, is when we read in the Bible and also in the Spirit of Prophecy, it tells us some ideas of how he reached the heathen who did not know about God. He started out by telling them about the Creator and explaining all the different ways of how he made the sun and the moon and all these things. And so he started with creation, right? And he explained to them who the great Creator was, and that how he created things and how the universe is held together by his power and those kinds of things, so they could get a mindset of how big God is. And then he would tell the Jewish and Gentile believers, also as he went along, he would go through and talk about how God was wanting to reach all people and how he used the Israelite people to bring a message through the sanctuary and those kinds of things, and how he worked with his people, and then how he promised a deliverer for the people. So he first had to help them feel their need, right? Because he's telling them, and then about the deliverer. And he would go through the prophecies and show them that the deliverer that came was the one that was promised, so that they would know. And then sometimes the Jews would receive him, and other times they wouldn't. Would someone turn some fans on? I think we need to get some air moving here. Would you like to turn the fan on over there, please? Okay. I know some of you didn't sleep very much last night, but we're glad you're here. Okay, so he reached the heathen by telling them about the Creator God. And then he would bring in the other parts of sin, because you have to know about sin before you want a Savior, right? So he would bring those things in. So why do we our focus in these lessons is going to be Bible storytelling and the deeper study of the Word. You're doing both of them, okay? And when I say these books are made for you to reach out, the rest of the set, for you to reach out to people who don't know God or who are new in learning about God. So 75% of the Bible is stories. Did you know that? 75% is stories, 15% is poetry, and 10% is analytical information. And Adventists, what do we focus on?
Analytical.
We like that analytical stuff, don't we? And it's good, it's great.
Theological.
But I don't want to miss the rest of it. And we do Bible stories, but we usually do them for the
Children.
children. Okay? But the Bible stories aren't just for children. There's many deep lessons in Bible stories. And there's also the whole picture of the great controversy is Bible stories. It's not analytical. So I'm trying to emphasize the whole picture, no? Yeah. Telling stories is an easy way to reach people's hearts. Much more than just telling them, you should keep the Sabbath. Okay? Especially you're working with Baptists. Up in the Northeast, there's a lot of Baptists, right? And so if you just go and say, you should keep the Sabbath, they're not, you have to find things in common and then you work toward that. But it's not the first thing you do. Okay, telling a stories opens people's hearts. Stories are easy to remember because they're like, they feel it with you as you tell the story, right? So, and as I mentioned, many people on the earth, there's way more people in the east than in the west. The earth is, what, probably 75%, and only a small group of it is more European thinking, that German thinking, right? So people in the Eastern cultures pass on their values a lot more through stories. Stories are powerful to reach people. Okay? So there's many times when you want to reach someone, they may not be open at all for you to bring your Bible and say, I'd like to give you a Bible study. Will you like a Bible study? No, I don't want a Bible study. But you say, oh, I was thinking the other day about your need to have a child. You want a child. So let me tell you a story. Well, they're going to listen. Then you can tell the story of Hannah. Right? And they're going to be listening. Like, oh, a story. They don't think it's evangelism, you know? And so we know of a situation where there was a group of Buddhist monks. They had a small monastery in Thailand. And they were, someone before had said, can I give you, study the Bible? No, they were not interested at all. But one person came and was visiting with them. He said, I know this really amazing story that really touched me. Would you like to hear it? Absolutely. He ended up, they said, you have to come back. You have to come back. You have to come back. He went back and told them the whole great controversy story. That's the gospel. That's the gospel. They heard it. And then another one was some they were Muslim ladies. And they would get together and have a little group with the Muslim ladies. And this other visiting lady from outside came. She was doing some health work there. And they said, you come and be in our group. And she was like, yes. So little by little, she became their friend and she told stories. They never would have accepted the Bible, but she was able to tell them stories. She chose all the stories about ladies in the Bible. So they were very interested in what the ladies were doing. And you can teach the gospel just through stories about ladies. And they're very open to it. So the studying of the Bible subjects and proof text should be there to confirm what you're teaching, but the Bible stories is what reaches the heart first. Okay? So as I shared in our experience of how these books got written, is because we would come back to India because I grew up in Pune, and so we would come back and help with evangelistic meetings. And I mentioned that earlier, that we would think, how can a Hindu person understand when you start evangelistic meetings with the second coming of Jesus? Because they don't even know who he is. Why do they care if he's coming back? And so my sister and I would talk to each other and say, why are we telling them about the second coming when they don't know about the first coming, or they don't know why he had to come, right? And so that's how these lessons actually got put together, was like, let's first tell them why they need him. Then tell them that he came, right, and gave the answers for them. So that's, the stories came from that use of the stories, from that idea. So heathen people, or people who don't know much about God, they need to hear the story from the beginning. They need to hear about the creation. They need to understand where sin came from and where evil spirits came from. So many people in the world that are not Christian, they need to hear that. They need to hear, technically there's not one story in the Bible about evil spirits, right? But you have to put it together with Lucifer in heaven, the fall of Lucifer, and how he and his angels were cast down, and then you explain to them that this is what all the spirits in the world came from this. And then they start thinking differently, like their worldview is being shaken, right? Whew, shaken a lot. So, they also need to know the end of the story, what the deliverer wants to do for them and in their lives. So there was one man, he was working with a group up in the northern part of India, and he was in the north and northeast and the whole area there, and he did his doctoral dissertation on this. So they were doing some research in the north, and they were trying to reach people, and they were doing it two ways. So they were comparing, just like if you went to seminary, and then you were doing sermons based on Bible texts. Okay, so the people, they would give sermons, and they would do subjects like, we're going to teach the Sabbath, we're going to teach this, we're going to teach this, just a list of texts. Okay, so then they were checking that, and then they taught a group to teach Bible stories. So they were comparing them in his dissertation. And they worked with village people, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists. They worked with all the different ones. So it wasn't just one kind. So they wanted to see how it would be. So after they did the study, they found that most people, when they had just a sermon based on all these different texts, they would go away and they weren't sure what they had learned, and they couldn't tell other people. Okay? But the ones who heard a story, then explanation, they would go home and tell everyone the story. And they started coming to church more and bringing people more, because they said, we can understand now what you are teaching us. So they started to bring more people, they started to tell more people, and it increased. Maybe they would have like 7 people join the church, and it increased to 30, 35 people would join, because they're like, we understand what it is. It's not just theology, it's experiential relationship with the God of the Bible. And so it was a very interesting book. I enjoyed reading it. It was a lot of case studies and experiences that you could read and say, wow. So how it worked. So I want to share, I think it's here, that's a little later. So, where am I? Okay, so another thing also, you can share the whole overview story with people. Or like I mentioned earlier, when you just meet someone and they have a need, you can share a specific story with them from the Bible. Or we're not just even saying just Bible, but you can share your own personal experience with Jesus that we'll talk about another time. Okay, so let's get some ideas. If someone is struggling with wanting their sins forgiven, what's a good story in the Bible to share with them? Someone over here? Is there a story you can think of? They feel the weight of sin. Is there some story that you would tell them? Okay, yes. Okay, the paralyzed man. Very good, yes. The blind man. Okay, someone whose sins were forgiven.
Zacchaeus.
Prodigal son. Zacchaeus.
Zacchaeus.
Zacchaeus, yes. See, it's not